For over 20 years, I've been an advice columnist for a relatively well-known online publication. Last night, I received the following message in my inbox. It hasn't been revised in any way, save for my name. Dear Veronica, I have a rather unusual problem. This particular dilemma concerns my son, or rather, my son's genealogy. You see, every generation of male in my family's history encounters a particular issue when they reach a certain age. Something that strikes when our hormones peak and our emotions are uncaged. Every firstborn male in my family, at some point during adolescence, has committed a murder. I remember my dad placing me on his lap, explaining this long-running familial tendency. Without going into specifics, he confessed to me that he'd killed a man at the tender age of 14, which he'd been caught and punished for. This violent history, he explained, could be traced all the way back to my great-great-great-grandfather. I'm not saying the same will happen with you, my father said, but you do come from a long line of short-tempered men, and if there ever comes a day when you find yourself on the wrong side of the law, it's better to confess your crime than face a lifetime of guilt. Remember that, okay? At first I found myself perplexed by the whole conversation, then heartbroken. As children, we tend to place actions in one of two categories, nice or mean. Even then I understood that killing was the meanest thing one person could do to another. How could my dad, of all people, have been so heartless? That night, I went straight to my room and cried myself to sleep. For the longest time, I never believed in the family curse. Even as a child, I felt my father was rationalizing his horrible misdeed, his way of excusing the inexcusable. I spent the following years trying my best to be the ideal kid, volunteering at retirement communities and soup kitchens, religiously committing myself to schoolwork, all to spite a man who had betrayed my trust. Years passed. I did become the ideal kid, though once my teenage years rolled around, I began to notice the little personality changes. At first, they were mostly minor tics, verbal and nonverbal. It started with small stuff, like cursing under my breath or pacing around my room before bedtime. It didn't seem like a big deal in the moment. How could it have? I was an honor student who read to the elderly. These were probably just overactive hormones, I figured. But soon my mind became inundated with violent thoughts. I'd be daydreaming in English lit class, imagining the rest of my classmates as a purpley pile of swollen corpses. I began to wonder just how firm of a grasp I had over my anger. Still, I did all the right things. This all culminated on my 17th birthday, when my mother handed me a birthday card. To the perfect son, the envelope read. When I opened the card, a car key fell into my hand. I'd obtained my driver's license only a few weeks earlier. My mother wiped a tear from her eye. "Be back by 11, okay, my love?" she said, kissing my cheek. For a while I just drove aimlessly, navigating the snaking woodland roads that surrounded our house. I felt proud of myself, as if I'd been vindicated for all my years of defying the violence that plagued my family's history. My dad could no longer blame that horrible sin from his youth on some silly jinx. Soon, my self-pride turned into anger at my father, which filled my mind with more rage. My teeth began to grind, and I started wringing the steering wheel as if it were a skinny neck. Suddenly, as if on cue, a hitchhiker appeared on the side of the road. She looked young, though she wore the ragged expression of someone who had seen a lot in her short lifetime. If she wasn't a teen runaway, then she certainly wore the uniform of one. Dirty wool cap, ill-fitting flannel shirt, ripped jeans with mud-stained knees. Somehow she had ended up out here in the middle of nowhere. I pulled over and rolled down my car window. "Want a ride?" I asked. She had big green eyes, with a tiny hairpin-shaped birthmark above her left eyebrow. She winked, then opened the passenger's side door. "Sure, stranger." I don't have a coherent memory of what happened that night. All I know is that at some point during the drive, I pulled over to the side of the road, then wrapped my hands around the hitchhiker's neck. Unable to process the present, I soon found myself dragging her through the wilderness, searching for a place to dump her still body amongst the dense bracken. Everything taking place before and after those 2 moments remained hazy in my memory. So, yeah, I committed murder, and unlike my old man, I managed to get away with it. Nobody ever suspected me of any wrongdoing. After all, why would they? Even if they found her body one day, I don't exactly fit the profile of a suspect in a Jane Doe case. Like the missing girl herself, my actions would be lost to time. Guilt consumed me for months afterwards. My grades slipped, I lost weight, I quit volunteering. I never told my parents what had happened, though I could tell by their little concerned looks that they suspected something. To be honest, I'm not sure how I got over the whole incident. Over time, I suppose I simply stopped thinking about it. Or maybe I never truly believed that I'd committed such a heinous act. Perhaps, I thought, it had all been some part of some horrible fever dream. Eventually, I composed myself enough to venture back out into the world. I attended an out-of-state college on a full scholarship, where I met my future wife. Time being what it is, those following years would go by like a blur, and before I knew it, I was a happily married man with clear career goals and a healthy son. We'll call him Danny. Yes, a son. What else could I do? My wife didn't know anything about the incident with the hitchhiker, and telling her wasn't an option. Hell, telling anyone wasn't an option. Figuring I could somehow break the chain by raising him correctly, I made a series of calculated decisions. First, I made a point of it to never introduce him to his grandparents, who would have inevitably tried to inform him of his family history. I even hired a psychiatrist for him, figuring it'd one day be necessary for someone to lend him a professional ear. When Danny's 18th birthday began to loom, I felt he'd be approaching some sort of unspoken milestone, and until recently, I thought we were about to rid ourselves of this curse. But strange things started happening as my son neared his big day. Through the crack in his bedroom door, I'd hear his footsteps pace back and forth, spewing obscenities beneath heavy breaths. Then I started having nightmares. Dreams of the day I strangled the runaway, long-forgotten details from that moment re-emerging from my subconscious, appearing in nightmarish split-second fragments of memory. I'd revisit the look she had in those prominent green eyes as her life drained away at my coiled hands. I recalled the sensation of dragging her light body by the ankles, glancing into her glazed-over eyes as I dragged her through the moonlit woods. Then the nightmare would end. I'd scream myself awake, hot sweat beating down my forehead. These dreams occurred often enough that my wife eventually moved out to go stay with her sister, asking for the dreaded time to figure things out. Nothing changed when Danny's birthday came around. For whatever reason, I'd held on to this notion that 18 would somehow be the magic number. Instead, all I could sense was the rage emanating from him. I knew it'd only be a matter of time before he snapped. One morning, I knocked on his bedroom door to no response. I slowly opened the door and noticed that the bedroom window had been left wide open. I glanced over at the computer monitor, which still glowed brightly from his work desk. A single piece of paper sat on the printer dock. I picked it up and scanned the page. It was printed straight from the Dear Veronica website. I read the following correspondence. Dear Veronica, over the past couple years, I've been absolutely miserable living with my parents. Every single day, my head is full of all these terrible thoughts, the main one being how much I hate my folks, mostly my dad. Since I was a little kid, all he's ever done is shelter me in the weirdest ways possible. He won't let me meet my grandpa and grandma. He says they're a bad influence, all while forcing me to see a psychiatrist every week. There's nothing wrong with me. If anything, he's the one who needs a shrink because he sure as hell won't talk to me about anything. Every night I wake up to the sound of his screams, which are the most horrifying things I've ever heard. Oh yeah, my dad's night terrors also drove my mom away. I don't think she'll ever come back either. Before she left, she'd be texting on her phone all the time, flicking her hair and giggling like a schoolgirl. She's not even being discreet about cheating on my dad, not that I blame her. Does this count as abuse? If not, I feel like we should expand the definition. At this rate, I should probably just ditch the rest of high school and move away. I'm 18 now. I could run off and start a new life for myself. What do you think? Thanks, unfortunate son. I rose from my son's computer chair, tears stinging my eyes. How could I have failed him so miserably? I reflected on that time my father placed me on his knee and told me about our family's past, realizing how correct he'd been in his approach. All I'd done up until this point was blind Danny from the truth, from his ancestral truth. I scrolled down to the response. Dear unfortunate son, while I sympathize with your situation, I also can't think of anything more petulant than what you just laid out for me. Are you trying to tell me, at your age, that you still harbor these childish notions of simply saying bye-bye and running off? Wake up, kiddo. Even if your father's night terrors are depriving you of sleep, it's nothing that can't be resolved with earplugs. And even if your mother is indeed sleeping with this person she's been texting, some things are probably best left alone. Clearly, you haven't learned this in your limited time on this earth. It's rough. I get it. 18 is a tricky point in life. You're an adult in the eyes of the law, but a long ways off from actually being one. Not everyone is equipped to handle that much responsibility at such a young age, unless you join the military, which you don't sound cut out for. I knew someone who made the same mistake once. It didn't work out well for them, and I don't think you have what it takes to survive on your own yet. Grow up. Yours truly, Veronica. At the bottom margin of the sheet, I noticed that the back had been stained in red ink from the other side. I flipped the paper and read the handwritten message on the back. Slaughter this pig. I've since called Danny's number countless times. He has yet to pick up, but I fear something really horrendous is about to happen. I'm about to contact the authorities as well, who I'm sure will have plenty of questions for me. But this is about you, Veronica. I should have prefaced this letter by saying this, but fuck it. I didn't write seeking your advice. This is just another letter from a failed father who can't stomach the thought of losing his son to prison or another senseless killing committed due to his family's curse. Here's my advice. Find a remote, secure area. Arm yourself. Prepare for the worst. My son is coming for you. Sincerely, failed father. For the first time in my 20-plus years as an advice columnist, I've heeded a reader's guidance. I'm currently holed up in a dingy old Motel 8 room with a pistol perched on top of the complimentary Gideon Bible staring warily at the door. But I'm not feeling fear right now. No, that's too simplistic an emotion. All I can muster right now is great sorrow and anger. Sorrow at the enormous pain this family's curse has caused myself and others. Anger at the man who composed this very long letter, who many years ago ran into a teenage runaway who thought she could make her own way in the world but didn't quite have the knack to do so. A girl with big, beaming green eyes and a hairpin-shaped birthmark above her left eyebrow. A girl I once called daughter.